Welcome to Connections, a podcast of the JWB Jewish Chaplains Council.
If you haven't figured it out, my name is Rabbi Elson, director of JWB. Connections is a quarterly podcast where we'll explore the various themes and topics related to our annual Jewish Chaplain training course. The theme of this year's training course is the military and VA rabbi, prophet, priest, and politician. And during this course, we'll explore the different roles that you are asked to play as a military and a VA chaplain, and how you can balance these roles to be the most effective. This year, our training course will be unique in that it will not only take place during a few days in May, but it will actually take place throughout the course of the year. You heard me right. This is a year-long course. Every month, JWB will be sending out the monthly training requirement, being a podcast, a webinar, an article, a book to read, or some other media, and some follow-on questions for you to ponder, all related to our training topic. As always, we encourage you to discuss these topics amongst yourselves and send us your comments and suggestions. So let's get started. Every military and VA chaplain is asked to fulfill many different roles. Like all of you, I struggle to find just the right balance between the different roles that one is asked to play. Certainly there's the ritual role, conducting services, conducting life cycle events, every once in a while actually getting a rabbi question, a shayla, to answer. In addition, all of us had administrative roles, reports to be filled out, evaluations to do, training to be conducted, whether it be for your battalion or for your other units. And finally, like all of you, I also served as the advisor to the commander on matters of morale and welfare. Many times, I'd be called to give him advice, even if he didn't ask for it. And so the question is, how does one balance all of these roles? Is one more important than the other? How do I set my priorities, and how do I inform the command of what my priorities are? JWB was fortunate enough to be invited to interview each of the three chief of chaplains on this particular topic. In this first podcast, we interviewed Chaplain Dondi Costin, Air Force Chief of Chaplains, and Chaplain Margaret Kiven, Navy Chief of Chaplains. And now, through the magic of podcasts, let's hear what Chaplains Dondi and Kiven had to say on this important topic. Well, good morning. We're here with Chaplain Dondi Costin, Chief of Air Force Chaplains. And, sir, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you helping us as we try to flesh out what are the different roles that an Air Force chaplain would play as part of our training. But I want to begin kind of in a different place and just try to get your thoughts, sir, on what do you consider successful ministry? If you point at a chaplain and say that's a successful chaplain, what are some of the things that you see in that person?
Yeah, thanks, Rabbi. Thanks for the work that you're doing to make sure, that you have the right chaplains who are entering active duty in the reserves and the Guard, as well as the training and development that you're doing to make sure that they don't just show up, but they show up well prepared and stay prepared. So we thank you very much for the work that you're doing. Happy to participate in this. I think it comes down to who defines success. And so what does success mean for the individual? In some cases, success for the individual means they reach a certain rank, or they reach a certain pay grade, or they have a certain assignment, or they have a certain path that they do. And I would say if that's your definition of success, then you've probably missed it from the get-go. Because actually success ought to be defined by God, and ought to be defined by your clients, in this case, who are the airmen that you serve. Mm-hmm. And so I would say you have to sort of first wrestle with what does success look like. The second thing that I would suggest you have to do is think about what is ministry. What does that mean? And so I worked with a chaplain assistant a number of years ago, and he himself, he wasn't very religious. But he was the best chaplain assistant I had ever known. And so he had this knack of being able to visit with people in the units. He had this knack of knowing who needed help. And he would come to me and he would say to me, "Hey, chaplain, you need to go visit this person, then this person, and that person, and here's the issues going on." And so one day I said to him, I said, "Philip, you are not a church person. You're not a religious person. You're not a chapel person, but you're really good at what you do." And I knew he hated the word ministry. For him, ministry was kind of I'll use the word sissy. And he didn't like it one bit. He was from Alabama. He was a hunter. He was a fisherman. He was a tough guy. And so I said, "Philip, I know you don't like the word ministry, but you're very good at it. So if you could pick another word or a way to define ministry, what would that be?" And he said, "Chaplain, it's easy. It's simply helping people." And so if you are a chaplain and you have come into this ministry as a calling, and you have come because you know God has sent you here, and you have come because you know that there are people in the world who are going to be the recipients of the ministry that only you can provide, then you're in the right place. And if you've come to help people, then you're in the right place. And so I would say a successful ministry is you, first of all, deciding that success is determined not by your career path necessarily, but by your calling and by you being here to serve God and serve others.
Great, thank you. When we're talking about ministry, a lot of time we're talking about a minister in a way is a prophet.
Exactly.
And I want to talk to you a little bit about using that prophetic voice. If you were to come up with rules for using your prophetic voice, what are some of these rules that you would come up with?
Yeah, I think from the Christian scriptures, the phrase that comes to my mind is quite simply, "Speak the truth in love." And so a young chaplain especially, but not just young chaplains, older chaplains, you've been there as well.
Right, yes.
And you know that sometimes when you speak the truth, your commander doesn't like it. Sometimes when you speak the truth, the troops don't like it. But your job as a prophet is to speak the truth. And your job as a chaplain, I would argue, and I think you would argue as well, is to speak the truth. The question then becomes, how do you do it? And so the first rule is speak the truth in love, but certainly speak the truth. And so along with that is if you build relationships with people along the way, if you earn the right to be their chaplain, if they look to you as somebody who is one of them and not an outsider, then you earn the right to speak that truth. You earn the right to go to the commander and you say to the commander, "Boss, we've had conversations before. Boss, I love you. Boss, you know that I'm a supporter of you, but here's an issue that I think we're having issues with. Here's an issue that I think we need to think about, and I want to be the person to help us walk through that." So you come as an advocate for the truth, but you also come with ideas about how this prophetic voice can be fleshed out in the unit. And so the first thing is just don't be a jerk.
Right.
If you're nice to
That's
people.
rule number one.
Rule number one, don't be a jerk. And the second thing is don't shy away from it. Again, it goes back to calling. If you're called to this ministry, and if your calling is such that you want to serve God and serve others, and it's not about you first and foremost, then you're going to be a lot more able to speak the truth and to be that prophetic voice. Because I think what rabbis often find, what chaplains find, is that that voice is not always welcome at first. But in the long run, the fact that the chaplain speaks the truth is good for the unit, good for the commander.
Right. Now, you used a word a little earlier that is not usually used in the context of chaplaincy, in the context of the military, and that's love.
Yes. Yes.
And I really, it kind of just struck me that prophecy is always done in the context of love.
It is. Because it's about what is best for the institution. Right. What is best for the commander? What's best for airmen? And as long as you put the institution and the commander and the airman first, God above all certainly, and yourself last, you can be an effective prophet.
Right. So I want to kind of switch gears now and go from the lofty concepts of prophecy and love and so on, and just talk about the chaplain as a politician. And before we actually turned that recording, we had a little discussion what that means or what that doesn't mean. We talked a little bit that the chaplain's a politician in terms of how he or she navigates within the institution. So what political advice would you give to a chaplain navigating the institution? Number one, for the sake of doing his ministry, and then later on for the sake of being successful within the institution, promotion, detailing, and so on.
Sure. Yeah. As I thought about this question last week, I read an article in the New York Times, and the name of the article, or the gist of the article was how do you become an effective CEO? Mm-hmm. And so how do you become the kind of person that in our world, in our lingo, would reach the levels of senior leadership? And so you were a senior leader in the Navy, right. Naval chaplaincy. And so how do you do that? It doesn't certainly happen overnight, right? I mean, it happens. Right. It happens because from day one, you put your nose to the grindstone. You understand your calling. You understand what competency looks like in this institution, mm-hmm. And you learn the politics of the institution. Right. Because every bureaucracy has politics. I think those rabbis who are listening to this podcast, who are now in the military, can recall right. When they were in their synagogues, and in that world there are politics. You know, there are politics with parishioners, there's politics with leadership, there's politics with fellow rabbis in the right. community, et cetera, et cetera. The same is true in this bureaucracy, and I think many rabbis would say, yeah, and it's double in this bureaucracy.
Right. Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Because not only do you have to deal with the bureaucracy of being an effective rabbi, right. you also have to deal with the bureaucracy of being an effective rabbi in an institution whose job is to support the nation's defense and ultimately to kill people.
Right.
I mean, so how do you make that transition? How do you become an effective priest, an effective prophet, an effective politician in this context? Right. And so it's learning how to navigate that political realm that will make you most effective. So let me just go back to the three things yes. that came from this article. Adam Bryant is a New York Times correspondent, and he'd written for a number of years now a column called Corner Office. And in the course of his time at the New York Times, he interviewed 525 CEOs, and he asked them a series of fairly common questions. And this, on the 27th of October of 2017, he finally wrote his very last wow. article after all of these years of doing this. And he gave some pretty helpful, I think, advice to CEOs, to people who want to be CEOs. And so I'm going to just parallel his advice to the military. So the first thing he says is that CEOs share a habit of mind that is best described as what he calls applied curiosity. In other words, they want to know how things work, they want to know how people work, and they want to make things better. And so I think that the first thing that a very good chaplain does is he goes into the system and he says, how does this system work? If you come into the system and you say to a system that's been around for hundreds of years in the military, mm-hmm. if you say to the system, I want the system to cater to my needs, you're probably not going to be effective. And so you come into the system and you say, all right, God's called me to this ministry. God's called me to meet the needs of Jewish and non-Jewish airmen, right? I mean, we're all called to serve all people. And so how do I do that best? Part of that is having this curiosity that says, I want to figure out how things work. I sometimes joke that I have made a career of asking dumb questions. Right. So you've done this on a ship. Right. I've done this on a flight line. And you go to a commander and you say to the commander, boss, I want to serve you well, and I'm new here, and I want to understand the mission of this unit. I want to understand how you tick. I want to understand how airmen tick, and so help me do that. And your commander will help you do that. You go to the flight line, you go on a ship, mm-hmm. and you go to an airman or a sailor, and you say, can you explain to me what you're doing?
Right.
I see you're turning this wrench. What will this do? And you just talk to airmen about the things that make them tick. So the first thing is this applied curiosity, learning the institution so that you can best minister in that context. The second thing is,
I'm sorry, and
yes,
it's learning
absolutely.
the institution from the bottom up,
from the bottom up,
that wrench turner,
that's
all the way
exactly
up
right.
to the commander.
That's exactly right. So because if you think about a commander, when it comes to being a chaplain, the commander has all sorts of people telling him things about the unit.
Mm-hmm.
But the chaplain provides the most unique perspective, I think, that the commander can hear.
Right.
And part of being a politician also involves being a priest and a prophet, and that is going to the commander and saying, boss, this is what I'm hearing. I can't tell you specifics about individuals, but I've heard it enough to know that we have a problem. And boss, sometimes the problem is you.
Right.
So it's Nathan saying sometimes you're the man.
Correct.
How do we do that well? And so doing that in a way that is helpful to the commander and the unit is the first thing. Loving, being curious about things enough to ask questions. The second thing is that these CEOs seem to love a challenge. And I love what Adam Bryant says as he sort of thinks through all these years of doing this. He says, for aspiring CEOs, discomfort is their comfort zone.
Wow.
They like to go in and fix problems. They like to understand the unit in such a way. And so that's what chaplains do. I mean, we fix problems. If a client comes in or a parishioner comes in, part of what we do is listen to what the problem is. Way too often we like to be the ones who immediately say, "Oh, I can tell you how to fix this." Get going on the problem, on the solution. When what we really need to do is be a listener first. And I think those who come up through the ranks first learn how to be good listeners. They love the fact that there's a problem that they can fix, but first understanding what the problem is the key. The third theme that Adam Bryant points out, I think really, for me, brought this all together. And is interesting, though, as I have thought about my own career lately, because I'm getting near the end, as most of us are. The third thing I think is really true, and this really goes to the heart of your question, Rabbi, is that they manage their own careers on their way to the top. They focus on doing the current job really, really, really well. Others have said, bloom where you're planted.
Right.
And what they don't spend a lot of time doing is thinking about the next job. And so if you spend your time thinking about how to get to the next level, and your boss figures out that you're spending a lot of time thinking about how to get to the next level, chances are you're never going to get to the next level.
Right.
And so what you're called to do is serve God and serve people, and do those things really, really well. Now, what he also says here is that if you build a record of success, if you prove in every job that you have that you're going to do the best job possible in that job for this unit, and you build this record of success, and you keep doing that, you're going to get to the next level. And that's all you can control. You figure out the job you're doing, you ask those hard questions, you love a challenge, you figure out problems, you figure out how to fix them. And you make sure that when your boss thinks about you, they think of you as an asset and not a liability.
Right.
I think we've all known younger chaplains who have, who when we mention their name or their name is mentioned to us, we go, "Oh yeah, that guy."
I remember him.
I remember
Right.
him, and you don't want to be that chaplain.
It sounds really simple. You're saying that the best way to get promoted is do your job. The best way to do your job is to do your job.
Do your job. Do it well.
Right.
Be committed to it. Be passionate about it. Help people. Be the person who, when the boss thinks about, hey, who do I know who's going to fix this problem, and they think about your name first. And most bosses don't think of you first necessarily as the rabbi if you're really good at it.
Yeah.
They think of you as an effective chaplain. And I think that applies across the board.
Right. Great. One other question that I had for you had to do with going back to prophecy. We were talking about doing your job and make sure the commander sees results. So the irony is, of course, most of the biblical prophets weren't very successful prophets. I mean, they were successful in that they preached the prophecy, but they didn't see the results of their prophecy.
That's right.
And I think a lot of times that's where the politician part comes in. You got to be a prophet, and also you have to know the system to be able to show results.
That's right.
In what you do. So it's kind of an interesting balance. So
it is.
I have one last question for you. You've been very generous with your time. So we talk about the military rabbi being a prophet, a priest, and a politician. Is there another role that I missed here? And I'll share with you the Navy chief of chaplains. She actually threw in their peer. That the chaplain is a prophet, priest, a politician, and a peer, and part of being successful is taking care of your colleagues and your fellow chaplains. Would you add any other one to it?
Actually, I wouldn't, because I think the two of you together, right. Chaplain Kibben and yourself, I think you've nailed it. And I really appreciate the fact that Chaplain Kibben has added the word peer, because you do have to be seen as at the same time somebody who is separate than, you really are. In the Air Force anyway, we used to use the phrase, and I kind of miss the phrase, we used to use the phrase that you are a visible reminder of the holy.
Right.
And when you step into the room wearing your chaplain functional badge, when you step into the room with those tablets on your shirt, in our case, people's language changes.
Right. Yeah.
People go, okay, it's the chaplain. We have to clean up our language now. I mean, that's a pretty powerful position that you're in. At the same time, you can't be, as the phrase that we sometimes use, you can't be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good.
Right.
You can't also be so earthly minded that you're no heavenly good.
Yeah.
So you have to be both peer and prophet and priest at the same time. You have to be one of the guys, one of the fellow sailors, one of the fellow airmen, but at the same time be the holy man. I'm using air quotes here, but they need to think of you as one of them, but also as a representative of the holy other.
Right. That's right. That's one more ball they have to have up in the air, because too much is not good and too little is not good either.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Sir, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you very, very much, and really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you in our training in the spring.
It's a pleasure. Really looking forward to it.
We hope that you stay tuned for our next podcast, where we'll interview the Army Chief of Chaplains. And that's it from us, from the World Headquarters of Jewish Welfare Board, Jewish Chaplains Council. This is Rabbi Irv Elson signing off till next time.
You have been listening to Connections, brought to you by the JWB Jewish Chaplains Council, serving those who serve.